G'day, and today on the Ross and Jono show, we revisit the events by which the Moses Scroll made its way into the possession of bookseller, antiquarian, and correspondent to the British Museum, Moses Wilhelm Shapira. Also, newly uncovered information reveals even more remarkable commonality between the Moses Scroll and the Dead Sea Scrolls. How long can the detractors deny overwhelming circumstantial evidence stacking up against them? And finally, are we closing in on the actual cave in which the Moses Scroll was found? All of that and more this week with Ross and Jono. G'day, my friend.
Hey, man, I'm excited about this one. What you just described, I could feel the hair on the back of my neck standing up thinking, man, this is a good show, Jono. I mean, who would not?
It's going to be a really good show.
I'm telling you, man, I'm ready. Look, I've got a document. Should we tell them about the document just before we get into this, just so that they know about it?
We need to do that. So you have put together a brilliant document that just makes this so easy and so very interesting, and you've uploaded that to academia.edu. You've got the link there. Let's share the link with everybody and tell us what this is.
All right, so what this is, when I was doing the original research, as I was writing the Moses Scroll, I was pulling together sources, all sources that I could find, every bit of information. And initially I found three. So this goes back to 2019, 2020. But I found three accounts where Moses Wilhelm Shapira is telling the story of the provenance and how he came to possess 16 leather fragments. So I put these side by side. Most people are familiar, religious people. You know, in Christianity, I was introduced to a harmony of the Gospels. Now my studies with the Hebrew Bible, I have a harmony of Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles. This is a harmony of the three major accounts. I found one more since then that I'll incorporate and update this document later. But it gives them side by side, so we get all the details about the provenance, which is basically the origin of something, and in this case, the origin of the scrolls that we're going to be talking about tonight. Jono.
I am rapt about this because, as I mentioned in the introduction, there is a particular piece of information that is not well known that we haven't spoken about before. We haven't touched on this before, Ross. So I'm really happy that we're doing this now for everybody, and we will get there very shortly. But it begins in the first chapter of your book. Oh, by the way, if the dear listeners, viewers have not yet got the book, you need to get the Moses Scroll. This is the textbook that we are working from, of course. And it's available on Amazon, hardcover, paperback, and Kindle if you want to get it right now. But work your way through it with us. And we are in the first chapter, and the first chapter does begin with in July of 1878. Viewers may have seen me talk about this particular date. We're not going to get into that now as far as coincidence or speculation may pertain to its
But it was a good year.
It was prophecy, but it was a good year.
Yeah.
It was, I tell you what, there's a lot going on. And it was in July of 1878 when certain Arabs and Bedouin approached Wilhelm Shapira, Moses Wilhelm Shapira, who was a reputable, as I said, a bookseller and antiquarian correspondent to the British Museum. Why did they approach him, Ross?
Well, the first thing that we know is that there is a custom, primarily in the Middle East, where if a friend has been on a vacation, it is part of at least the Arab culture to visit that friend when they return. And you make sort of a party about it. You know, you bring all your family and your friends and you go to visit your buddy that just got back like you would do for a birthday party in a way. It's happy birthday, Jono, by the way. See how I snuck that in there? All right. So,
Thank you very much.
So this particular Arab, a sheikh by the name of Mahmoud Arakat, he brings many of his Arab friends from other tribes, Bedouin tribes, and they go to Shapira's shop because he's been on a trip to Yemen and various other places because he's a manuscript hunter. He is searching for manuscripts. They know that about him, and they went to find out a little bit about it. So that's how they find themselves in the shop. And on this particular day, if people follow along in the document, I'll just say that during the course of that visit, Shapira hears for the first time, Jono, about a particular manuscript, some fragments. And they are in the possession, little black fragments with writing on it, in the possession of another Arab. So Shapira hears this. He is an agent for the British Museum. He knows ancient manuscripts. It piques his interest, but he knows just enough about these friends of his. You can't act too interested, Jono, because that would drive the price up, right? So he goes to his buddy, and I'll just touch this, and then we'll continue on with your narrative. But he just asked his friend Ericot, which we know a lot about, by the way. We know about him from historical sources, but he asked Ericot, hey, I really want to know more about this. And Ericot says, okay, I'm going to have a little thing at my house tomorrow. I'll invite you. Don't talk about it now. Go ahead, Jono. I'm ready.
All right.
Yep.
So I just want to illustrate, if I can, the shop, because, as I've mentioned, this is the third time, bookseller, antiquarian, correspondent to the British Museum. At this time in Jerusalem, Jerusalem is experiencing a major uptick in theological tourism. Can I say it that way? People, at least, who are interested in the Bible and have flocked to Jerusalem for a piece of something authentic, something to take home with them, a piece of biblical history, if they might. Where do they go if they want something like that, Ross? They go to Moses Shapira's shop.
That's right. That's right. And one of the reasons that, if we know this, because in 1876, one of the most popular guides to the Holy Land is Baedeker. And in that particular book, I have this footnoted in the first chapter. It says this, on page 145 in a section on Jerusalem under the heading Books, Photographs, the entry reads, Shapira, Christian Street is the best shop. So this is one of the most popular guides for tourism in the Holy Land in 1876. Now he's had his shop open. People debate, we all debate, us Shapira maniacs debate on when did he open his shop exactly. We know that he was in the business of antiquities from 1871. The very big reason why that date comes in, we'll talk about probably next discussion. But he's already known as the best shop. Now, there are other shops around there. In fact, we have evidence that one of the most popular things that you can get at the time are these olive wood Bible cases, and we have photographs and even letters from. Remember when Samuel Clemens went to the Holy Land? Remember the book Innocents Abroad, Mark Twain? When he went, he had his mother, someone make him one of these. Now, we know for a fact it wasn't from Shapira's shop, but Shapira dealt in these too. Postcards and various
I have to ask
books.
you, do you have an olive wood Bible case? Do you have one?
I do not. And
you want
if
one,
I
though,
could,
don't you?
well, only if it was made by Shapira. I'm not really into a wooden case, but man, if I had one that Shapira made, I think I would get one for sure. Yeah.
So antiques and books he was known for. He was a go-to for tourists, but also a correspondent. Now, he's not just a correspondent to the British Museum. And as you mentioned, he's gone to Yemen. He's brought back a whole lot of documents, scrolls, and so on and so forth. And he's sold these on to the British Museum, and they have quite a catalogue there of his works. Not his works, his supply of documents.
Right.
But it's not the only museum. What other museums has he supplied?
Well, it's the British Museum, but also the Berlin, the Staatsbibliothek. And one of the things that, the Tylers and I went to Germany. Now, Dave has gone on several occasions for business, but he's also, on each of his visits, he's tied in key visits with personnel at the Staatsbibliothek. The State Library in Berlin made a very key contact there. And they've been very helpful. So, but we've been there. We've seen some of these old documents. It is quite fascinating. And in fact, In fact, one of the things that's really important to point out, we'll get into more detail about it later, it was at the Staatsbibliothek that Idan Dershowitz discovered in a book that contained a stack of
Oh,
various
yes.
things from Shapira, whereas after Shapira died, his wife bundled up quite a few things and passed them
Mm.
on to a German scholar, which we'll also discuss later. I don't want to throw too many names at people. These were later bound up, and within that volume of papers were three distinct pages, which turned out to
The
be
purple
a
pages.
transcription of the
Mm.
Shapira manuscript fragments, at least a partial transcription. And I
Mm.
won't talk about it today, but I'll tell you this. Even though Idan Dershowitz discovered that, I have an idea that it's not universally accepted in our group, but I think I know that that particular transcription goes with another document that we have that the two were separated. We'll talk about that. But it's mainly the Staatsbibliothek in Berlin and the museum, the British Museum
British Museum.
in England. Yep.
So this is the reason why they have approached him, because he is quite clearly the expert and the man to bring this to. And he may be interested in what they described as blackened leather strips with barely discernible writing on them. And as you mentioned, it did pique his interest. He met up with them the next day to not only hope to have a look at these, but to hear the story as to how they ended up with them. And the story begins with about 10 years earlier, quote unquote, about 10 years earlier. Is that right? Is that what you've got in your document there?
Yeah, that's right. And we have the dates aren't quite the same, it's like three different accounts by Shapira,
Mm-hmm.
and he's just given a ballpark. But before people begin to say, hey, wait a minute, one of the reports that he said was about 10 years. One of them says maybe 12 years. One of them, I just happen to have, Jono, this is
Mm-hmm.
probably, in my opinion, this is the best book on the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, when I bought it, it didn't cost what you'd have to pay today. But because it's so rare, I looked today and it cost $143. It's
Wow.
called The Dead Sea Scrolls, A Full History by Weston Fields. And
Mm-hmm.
in this particular book, there are all sorts of details, but it opens, in other words, this gives the full history, that's why it's called that, of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And one of the things that it tells us off the bat, in other words, the first page, is that the various reports of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Qumran manuscripts, there are all these, let's call them air quote, inconsistencies or variations in the story. The general part of the story is we all know it. The Bedouin of the tribe are walking around, so forth. But some of the details don't match. But what we know is that in 1878, Shapira hears about a manuscript that was discovered approximately, Jono, if I can say that, approximately 10 to 12 years or so before.
So it'd be fair to say then, Ross, that probably not before 1865. Is that fair?
I would even say, because I've done research on another clue we have in these narratives, and I say it was 1865, and we know what happened in 1865. Now, did you want me to touch on that now, or you want me to come
Go
back
ahead.
to it? All right, so
Well,
it's
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, so it's and just jump in if you have other questions, but it's roughly 1865. And the leader called the Wali, it's a term for an Ottoman ruler over this region, is really cracking down on one group of people which resist submission, and it's the Bedouin. Now, one of the things that we learn about, I read a book when I was doing research, writing the book by Eveline van der Steen, and she's really the world's authority on 19th century Bedouin culture and so forth. And I learned so much from that validates everything that Shapira says, from the names of the tribes, the locations that they lived in. And one of the things that we know is that the Bedouin were unruly. and they didn't fall under Ottoman authority the way the Ottomans wished that they would. One of the things that they wanted, the Ottomans were trying to conscript every person who lived in their land to military service and make them pay taxes. And quite honestly, the Bedouin just said, we're not going to be any part of any of your games. We're not going to do it. So they resisted.
And very much the same today in Israel.
That's exactly right. They still don't.
They are somewhat unruly and they just don't follow the rules. Okay, keep going.
That's right. And so there was in roughly 1865, the Ottomans were putting forth what they called Tanzimat reforms. And a lot of it was doing good, you know. I'm talking about modernization and teaching all sorts of things to the inhabitants of the land, trying to calm, you know, in the U.S. we talk about the wild, wild west. Well, the wild, wild east, in this east of the Jordan Rift was really the problem in ancient Moab, Ammon, that entire region. So very quickly, this turned into a big problem. And the Wali of Damascus actually involved himself. He was so much wanting to get this group under control, but they started putting pressure on these Bedouin. And the story goes that about this time, some Bedouin had occasion to flee from their enemies, meaning they're fleeing from north to south, east of the Jordan Rift, and they find themselves in a position to hide. And so there, if you look at a map, the Wadi Mujib, the river Arnon, high up in the cliffs near the place known as Auror, they drop over the cliff and they hide in a cave. They find refuge in a cave. We're going to talk about those caves in just a minute. And when they go in, Jono, they find in the back, in a niche, a bundle of what is called old rotten linen covered in sort of a asphalt smelling black sticky tar something. Well, the Bedouin hope that it's gold, and so they quickly tear open the bindings and they discover nothing but old blackened leather strips with writing on it. They throw it away, you know, like they just throw it down. One of them picks it up, according to the story, takes it to his tent, thinks it's a good luck charm, an amulet of some kind, and he supposedly becomes rich, Jono. He becomes rich. He has lots of sheep and women and, you know, everything that a Bedouin man could need in life. And that's our story. But you and I, again, with the Tylers, have had some pretty fun in that region. You want to tell us a little bit about it?
We have. In the Wadi Mujib. So this is good. Now, before we continue, I just want to tick a couple of boxes that we've mentioned because of the head of the program, we mentioned commonalities between the Moses Scroll and the Dead Sea Scrolls. And what we have so far is, well, we have the Dead Sea, we have the Bedouin, we have the cave, and as you just mentioned, we have them wrapped in linen. And these are all things that they both have. Now, just going, you've explained to us the Bedouin, that's great. The cave, we went down through the Wadi Mujib on tour, on the Tanakh tour. And whilst we were down there with our Bedouin guide, we happened upon a large cave, on the other side as we were crossing from south to north. And you and he decided, let's go and have a look in that cave. And it just didn't look quite, it was quite clearly a cave. But it wasn't until you guys got down there and walked into the cave that we could see from the road just how very big the opening was.
Right.
And you filmed on the inside, and it was enormous inside. And what it demonstrated to us, it did have shelves, carved into the wall of the cave. And what it did demonstrate is that the strata, the Wadi cliff face, if you like, supported such caves. Was this the actual cave? Are there other caves? I know that you went back, as you mentioned, with Dave and Patty, and you did a little bit more investigation in that area. Do we know the exact cave? Do we know where it is?
Not yet, but this is an excellent lead in. At the time you get really excited, as you said, we're driving along in the bus, and I remember I said, you look on this northern wall here, on this cliff face, because
Hmm.
it's going to probably be between here, and I'm pointing here and here, because we kind of know. We know a general area. Shapira
Mm.
describes, he knows the place well. He said it's about 30 minutes east of Aurora. Now,
Mm.
Devon and Aurora. So we can find those roughly on the map. But what does that mean, 30 minutes? Well, it's not 30 minutes in a car. It's going to be 30 minutes on generally understood to be horseback at the time. And so we kind of had an area marked off. Now, we got excited because we're generally in the right area when we see this cave. In fact, one of our tour participants said, it could be that one. And I said, yeah, exactly. Oh, look, stop the bus. So now I'm fairly convinced that that's too far to the west. I think that
Hmm.
the actual cave must be further to the east. So, but it did give us an opportunity to go into a cave and think and begin to put things together and look at the map. But it was the first, all I did was once I got it in my blood, I said, I've got to
Mm.
keep doing this. So I
Yeah.
immediately talked to Dave and Patty. Dave, one of the things that he does in his, he and Patty in their business, they have cartographers and map people. And
Hmm.
so they hired a group and made some really high definition maps. And what we were then able to do, involving Daniel Wright as well, is re-coordinate things, move further to the east. And we hired a guide. And then when we went back, we went to those areas east of. But again,
Mm.
time was limited. We did that in February when I was giving my lecture at the Albright, and the
Mm.
weather was really bad. There were a whole host of reasons why we didn't succeed. But we did make a reconnoiter, and we did reconnaissance that area, and we've got some really good go-dos. In other words, we're going to be going back to the area with more information. We've
And
got
so
the
this time you
maps
know
and so forth.
exactly the area that you want to close in on. So that area
We
is
know
getting
more.
smaller,
Yeah.
that you want to
Yep.
investigate. So that's
And
great. Uh,
yeah, and
Matter of
Dave.
time,
By the
Ross.
way, Dave just posted a photo in the chat here, in the Yakad chat, where
Oh yeah,
Patty is
I see it.
climbing out of a cave. We went down in there. And there were several. What we do know is we've got a pretty good idea of where to look, and particularly because Shapira makes this statement. It's in the document. Without reading the whole thing, he basically says that it's a protected area,
Hmm.
that neither the rain from this direction or this direction would get in. Shapira sees this cave in 1875. This is just 3 years before he comes to possess the manuscript, but about 10 years
Mm.
after it was discovered. But Shapira says, I know this place well, and because of its protected positioning, a document could survive in there. We're going to talk about those
Mm.
documents and the survivability.
So you again mentioned that as the story goes, they picked up these bundles that were wrapped in linen. They unwrapped it. It didn't have any gold, and they thought, whatever it is, we don't need it.
Yep.
One of the group decided, hey, perhaps it's a good luck charm. I'll take it home. We'll see how things work out. And luckily for him, things worked out well, and he kept hold of it. But wrapped in linen, this is something again that's that the Dead Sea Scrolls have in common. But you and I
Yeah.
speculated some time ago. We had a conversation about whether or not it might have been in an earthen vessel, in a pottery jar of some description,
Yeah.
in the same way that many Dead Sea Scrolls were.
Right.
Dead Sea Scrolls were wrapped in linen, placed inside a jar, a sealed jar, and many of them were broken. Some perhaps weren't in jars, but many of them were. And you can see these sort of jars when we go to the Israel Museum and so on and so forth, and go to Qumran. Um, and it just kind of made sense that it would have been. It would have made sense that such details wouldn't appear in the story, because why would it be relevant except for after
Yeah.
the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? So it was always an interesting thing. But you happened upon some information that was passed on to you. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think so. What happened? The people who watch this series will learn more and more about Matthew Hamilton. He's an
Mm.
Australian. Brilliant, brilliant researcher. And in
Mhm.
fact, in some of the most remarkable discoveries associated with Shapira research, he's the guy. He's the guy on the planet. No one has written a book or done a movie or anything in modern times who have not benefited greatly from Matthew Hamilton's research.
Mm.
We're all very blessed to have him on the team, and he's the most generous guy that you know. So when I was getting ready, when I was preparing my paper for the Albright Institute, uh, as typical as the case always is, Matthew Hamilton wrote me and he said, "Hey, Ross, I think you might not, maybe you don't know about this." And he sent me this interesting passage about Shapira and Saleem. And what it did, it confirmed a suspicion I had that Shapira, I had some evidence, but not all the evidence, that Shapira was one of the first people on the scene transcribing and interpreting the Saleem inscription. So Matthew happened to send me, get this is what's so amazing about the guy. He sends me a document that is from a Russian book, a Russian author in 2011 republished a diary from 1881 from a Russian by the name of Antonin. So Antonin wrote in his diary in 1881 this reference I needed about Saleem inscription in Shapira. But as I
Mhm.
read down, because Matthew copied that with a little extra, and I think just maybe to tease me, I don't know. But I was unsure, and I'm still working on this, as to whether what I'm about to share with the audience is a piece of the 1881 diary, or
Mhm.
if it is from the later author describing the events of the 1880s. I think it's the latter. I think it's a modern author giving something. I don't know if we can verify it, but we could. We're looking. That's, in other words,
Mhm.
I don't know Russian, so I'm having to depend on online tools. Clody is multilingual. Maybe Clody knows Russian too. I don't know, but we'll ask. So here's the translation that I have of this piece from the document. It says, in 1877, Shapira turned to the Berlin professor Schlotman for an expert evaluation of the parchment scrolls he had allegedly acquired for a pittance, sealed in a clay vessel discovered by Bedouin in one of the caves of Transjordan. And then it goes on to describe a little bit more about the document. But get this. So this is the first reference that I know of that
Mm.
not only do we have a correlation between the discovery of the Shapira manuscript and the Dead Sea Scrolls,
Mhm.
which we're going to do an entire show. Requires an entire show just to talk about this. This is
Mm.
what got me interested in the whole thing anyway. But think about this: written on leather, Paleo Hebrew, the use of interpuncts, when it's scriptio continuum, meaning no breaks between words unless there are words separating dots. If you get to the end of the line and you're not finished with the word, you just drop to the next line and break the word and you keep going. When the Dead Sea, when the Shapira manuscript came forward, nothing like this had ever been seen, Jono.
Right. So this is a
And
question that I have. Yep.
yeah,
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and the document is wrapped in linen.
Mm.
It seems to be coated in what was interpreted at the time to be an asphalt or a bitumen, a pitch. Whenever they smelled these things, they stunk. They had sort of a bitumen asphalt smell to
Mm.
them, is the way they're described. What is amazing, Jono, is that when the
Mm.
Dead Sea Scrolls are discovered in 1946, 47, depending on which account you read,
Mhm.
the same description comes forward. They're written on leather. Some are in paleo, which by the way, we know there are only certain scrolls that are written in paleo. We're going to talk about all that. Now, go ahead. I
Mhm.
cut you
Mhm.
off, though.
No, no, no. So I was just going to say. So we have those aspects of the scroll that you just highlighted again. The region of the Dead Sea, the Bedouin that found it in a cave, the scroll that's wrapped in linen, and potentially if this is correct, sealed in an earthen vessel. So this is
Right.
the new information. If that's correct, then it just adds, it stacks up the circumstantial evidence. It really makes one wonder, Ross, how scholars can continue to line up and declare this particular document as a forgery. It really makes me wonder. Are they still doing
Yeah.
that? Are there still people that are coming forward and saying, not true, not real?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. There will always be there. I say always. I think that scientific evidence can help stave off some of that. But one of the things that's important is you start getting enough evidence coming forward, it becomes harder and harder to deny. The book of Jeremiah talks about where you seal a document in a leather, in an earthen vessel that it might last a long time. So
that was
so
a
this
deed,
is
wasn't it?
yeah,
A
that's
deed of a
right.
property, wasn't it? That Jeremiah, yeah, quite right.
Yeah.
So let me ask you something. By the way, wrapped in linen, do we have any other ancient document like the ones? Or wouldn't it be great to find that document that Jeremiah sealed in an earthen vessel and buried? I think, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
Are there such documents that are recorded prior to Shapira's scroll that is reported to have been wrapped in linen?
Well, I don't know that they were wrapped in linen, but I happen to have, again, this Dead Sea Scroll book by Weston. And by the way, I included this in my book. But one of the things that we find is that there are two other accounts of ancient scrolls that were discovered, and these references are to scrolls that were found before the Dead Sea Scrolls. And let me just pull those references up. Let's see. I think I'll just post the comments rather than take the time to pull the two incidents up. But there are two different stories of scrolls that were found based on early sources. Now, this would have been, well before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scroll, hundreds and hundreds of years. In a cave, in jars near Jericho, all of these details that come out, but I don't think it actually describes any that were wrapped in linen. But one thing that's certain is that if you read about the Dead Sea Scrolls, you do have evidence that that these particular manuscripts are very comparable. Everything that we read about the Dead Sea Scrolls, from the wrapping in linen, the jars. Now, by the way, I should point out, not all of the scrolls were found in jars. Some were found.
The Dead
In
Sea
fact,
Scrolls,
we know that some of the jars were stolen. Or sometimes we even have stories of Bedouin who evidently went into caves, dumped those old yucky documents out of them, and used the jars to take water to their goats. So, the jars are much more useful than these documents, till they found out there was money involved.
There was money in it, yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. All right, so now this brings us back to, let's just go back to Shapira. So he wants to acquire these 16 leather strips. He feels that this is definitely up his alley. He wants to take a look at them, perhaps obtain them, purchase them, and he does so with the help of, and here enters Saleem al-Ari. What can you tell us about him? The infamous Saleem al-Ari.
Well, so the first thing that we have to do is keep our Saleem straight. From what we know, the Saleem of the story of the discovery is not the Saleem of other stories related to Shapira. In fact, in one of the letters, and it's in this document. Yeah, that's right.
I didn't know that.
The point is made.
Are you telling me this is not Saleem al-Ari?
That is
helps
correct.
Him
that is correct.
Wow. Fill me in.
Yep.
Fill me in.
All right. So listen, it says, I'm going to read from the report that Shapira gave to Herman Goethe and Edward Meyer. Now, some of our viewers know the story. That's this book. Again, the Tylers and I, this was the book that Dave and Patty hired the translator to translate from German. This is the only academic book from the period. So in 1883, July of 1883, the first week of July 1883, Shapira shows up in Leipzig, Germany, to meet with his friend Hermann Goethe, tells Hermann Goethe, you've got to see this document. He shows it to him. They spend 5 days together in the Hotel Hoffa. Get this, Jono, I have to tell this every time. Hotel Hoffa was located at the corner of Ross Place and Ross Street. You got it, Jono. I'm not making this up. This is providential. The Lord has called me for this work. Can you imagine? Right there, Ross and Ross.
Isn't there on the corner there's a square called Ross Square? Isn't that right?
Yeah, it's actually Ross.
There's like a statue of you in the middle with, people go to feed their pigeons.
5'8".
Like a water fountain.
That's right, 5'8", and I'm standing like this pointing. No, it's not there anymore. But here's the deal. So they go there and they write this particular document. But one of the things in this document is an account, which is in my document here. You can download it right now from my academia page. It says this: a certain Saleem of the tribe of the Ajaya, ? He doesn't know what Shapira calls it. He can't quite make it out. Who lived east of the Dead Sea between the Wadi al-Mujib and Karak, offered a blackish leather strip consisting of 5 layers for sale in Shapira's shop. Shapira was not present, discovered the cheaply acquired upon his return. But that Saleem, listen, whom Shapira knew only fleetingly, did not want to show himself again in Jerusalem, since he or his tribe had a blood guilt upon him, due to which one could pursue and punish him there. So what happens is, at the meeting at Sheikh Erakat's house, Sheikh Erakat is asked by Shapira, could I see a piece of this manuscript? I'm very interested in it. And as some of the Bedouin that are there overhear him, and they say, no, we don't, the Bedouin aren't going to give up a document like this because it brings blessing to the home and the land. And if they give this up, they're going to bring bad on them. You can't, in other words, they're building it up like it's going to take some money.
Yeah,
everybody's willing to take a shot at a little bit of cursing if you got enough money, is the thought.
Yeah.
So he asked him, could you? So what Erakat tells him, Erakat says, I know a guy who would sell his mother-in-law for a few, Turkish coins. And so he's talking about this guy, Saleem. Now, one of the things that Hermann Goethe says, because he's wondering, could this story be true? It's kind of fantastical, Jono. You've got this guy. He says that he found Bedouin found the scroll in a cave, wrapped in linen. Why is it coated in this black, sticky, icky stuff? It just doesn't make sense. And so now you're telling me all these other details, but he says, who is going to prove any of this? Well, guess who did? I did, Jono, and other researchers did. Here's what we found. Erakat is the guy in the 19th century. You read any pilgrim's report from the 19th century, and what they'll tell you is that the Erakat family are the ones who will safely, you got to pay a little money now, but they'll safely guide you to the Transjordan. Let's say you're a Christian. You want to get baptized in the water that Jesus was baptized in. You got to pay somebody, man. You got to pay somebody. You can't just go up in there. They'll strip you of your garments and your treasures and leave you stranded in the desert for the buzzards. So you got to pay somebody. You pay the Erakat family. So that checks out. And every detail, including the detail about this tribe. I wanted to know what we could find out about this Ajaya tribe. It's spelled Ajaya, but Goethe includes a question mark indicating that he might have misunderstood Shapira. So I did some research and I found this woman, scholar Eveline Vandersteen, who is a specialist on the Bedouin tribes. And I wrote to her, and she sent me a link to her book, which I bought. And in the book, it has this wonderful map of all the Bedouin tribes of the 19th century. And it's the Hajaja tribe. And the Hajaja tribe, which is what Shapira would have said, probably pronouncing it more with an Arabic flavor. So the German ear heard a Jewish person reading or saying an Arabic word, Hajaja. And he wrote down question mark. We now know that this tribe, they're understood. And I know in our modern day of sensibilities and woke and political correctness, you can't say this kind of stuff that they said in the 19th century. But the writers at the time would say, those dadgum Jajas, man, they're crooked, they're thieves, they're just, you can't trust them, and they'll sell their mother-in-law for a few Turkish coins. Well, that's what everybody says about them, right? The Hajaja. But this Saleem is from that tribe. And so what
he's
happens...
This particular Saleem serves, so he's from this tribe, and he serves as a courier for the leather strips, and he brings them piece by piece almost to Shapira. Is that correct? Over the coming days?
That's right. Yeah. So what happens is the first deposit, if you will, the Sheikh Erekat gets a hold of Saleem, a Jaja tribe guy, and says, hey, look, there's a little bit of money in this. Shapira's got money. He wants to see the scroll. You get it from the other Arabs. So Saleem, not Saleem al-Ari, Saleem.
Not al-Ari.
No, he. And by the way, this guy's he goes and he brings one piece to Shapira's shop, but Shapira's not there. When he gets to the shop later, his shop manager says, "Hey, some Arab named Saleem brought this for you," and Shapira doesn't know how to get in touch with him, right? So he gets up with Erekat and he says, "Hey, how do I get a hold of that guy?" And he said, "Oh no, I'll be the intermediary. You can't just get a hold of him." So he contacts him. They arrange a total of 5 meetings at a place called the Apostles' Fountain. It's over by Bethany, and so they meet on the road, and each time Saleem brings a piece of the scroll. And so it takes about 4 different visits. This is during the month of August 1878. And on the 4th or 5th visit, he gives him what Saleem gives to Shapira. Shapira gives him some money. He's not paying much for it. It's just a little bit. But he says, the guy tells him, that's it. That's all of it. Right there, that's all of it. And then Shapira then begins, he's already begun to try to translate. We're going to talk about this in another discussion. But he is already sensing that Jono, that he's got something quite important. In fact, he thinks it's ancient and authentic, and we'll tell you just how ancient later. Go ahead. I know you got questions.
Just out of curiosity, no, because I'm just getting this straight in my head. So this is Saleem the courier. He brings to Shapira the 16 leather strips. Now Shapira has them. Now, how many days have passed since the Arabs first approached him?
It's been about 5 weeks. Yeah, it's been about 5 weeks. Yeah.
Now, we're now in August. Okay, so just curiously, while I'm thinking of this, Saleem al-Ari, who probably we will talk about in some more detail next week, do we know what tribe he's from?
We don't know for certain. We don't know for certain. Okay. We do know that he's very tied with people across the Jordan with the other Bedouin tribes, and he's earned and garnered their respect and their confidence. Or confidence, because he brings them things like cigarettes and tobacco and coffee and who knows what else. But he's in, and he works with Shapira very closely. And we're gonna put these two together. Now, a lot of people, by the way, let me say this about Saleem al-Ari. When we went on the Tanakh tour to Jordan. And of course, I keep bringing up the Tylers because they're always with us on some of these trips, and they know our guide al-Ari. Al-Ari is of Bedouin descent, not the Hajaja tribe, but he was very interested to know that I was very interested in the Bedouins, the various Bedouin groups. So he has been very helpful to me just on some conversations that we had. But he confirmed what I said when I said, hey, here's what I heard about this Bedouin tribe. So forgive me, if this isn't accurate, but this is what they said in the 19th century. Do you concur with that? And he said, yeah, these are bad. These were bad at the time, and they still have that reputation. So, but all of these different details and facts come together to make the most incredible story. But the point I want to make, Jono, is that it's validated. Like, I can't stress, Herman Goethe says, who's going to verify these things? I mean, can we really verify this? I mean, how are we to know? Like, here, let me read this. This is from Goethe. He goes, this is just part of it. You got to read this story. He says, should something be true in such reports, they tend to be told sloppily. Wait, let me back it up just a minute. I don't want to express doubt that Shapira accurately conveyed what was told to him, in other words, about how he came to possess the scroll. Rather, I think that there is little to give of the stories that the Arabs know to tell of the antiquat they sell. Anyone that's been involved with the antiques trade in situ knows this very well, even Shapira himself. This is the part. Should something be true in such reports, they tend to be told sloppily, and should one inquire exactly, only then will be outright lied to. A possibility to verify our story, Jono, is thus, in my view, completely non-existent. 2 points. Who will track down that Bedouin, or the original owner, or the cave in which the strips were supposedly found during the time of Moab's subjugation under the Turks? The story thus means absolutely nothing for our knowledge surrounding the origin of the manuscript. And Jono, I hate to disagree with my man Herman Goethe, but he's wrong. These details matter because later people doubt that Shapira's telling the truth. Things that they hear Shapira say, they say that can't be true. Couple of examples. No way that leather could survive in a cave for thousands of years, Jono. There's no way. There's no way. And guess what? There is a way. We know that there's a way. We know there's a way because in 1946 or 47, scrolls were discovered in these caves. And we're going to have a whole discussion on the connection between the Dead Sea Scrolls and our scroll, which is the first. I believe it's the first example in the modern era of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
So this is a highly speculative question, and there's no way that we can answer this definitively, of course. But let me ask you the question.
All right.
Had the Dead Sea Scrolls been discovered first, or even whilst, you know what would have been beautiful, is if they were discovered whilst Shapira was in 1883 showing the world over in Europe these scrolls and offering them to the scholars to scrutinize. Had the details come out about the Dead Sea Scrolls then, do you think it would have swayed them in favor of authenticity when they see, found in earthen vessels, found wrapped in linen in the Dead Sea area, so on and so forth, everything that they have in common, would it have swayed them?
I want to say that it would, but what's strange is that actually the opposite seems to be the case. Let me explain that because it almost said, yes, it would make a difference. I want to think that it would make a difference, but what actually
I do too,
happened,
but of course we know that when the Dead Sea Scrolls were uncovered, many scholars came forth and said, look at this, they're trying to copy the Shapira's story in the way that those ones, but look, it's almost identical. Of course, these things are fake, right? There were scholars that actually said that, right? Exactly.
And let me give you a couple of those references, Jono. This, again, is in Weston's book. I also quote Weston in my book, but I was reading this again today for today's discussion. And so there's a discussion after the Dead Sea Scrolls are discovered. There's sort of a race, they're trying to figure out, they're trying to authenticate them. They don't know. No one has seen anything like this. But this is interesting that this comes up. So from the École Biblique, this is talking about two scholars that are making their way to visit another scholar with the question on authenticity. And it says this is in Weston's book, according to Anton Hazu, Father Vincent would have been the more logical person at the École to judge the scrolls. We're talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls from Cave 1. But he did not even want to look at them because he was afraid they were fakes, Jono, something like the one Shapira had tried to sell years before. And the footnote to that actually says the same thing, that this was the main concern at the time. This was confirmed by Father Dominique Bartholomew. The Shapira incident, this is the footnote, continues to intrigue scholars of ancient manuscripts, but most paleographers consider Shapira's document a fake. The fragment itself seems to have disappeared. Now so this is the first person. In other words, they said Father Vincent. If they could have gotten Father Vincent to look at the Isaiah scroll, the three initial scrolls, the Genesis, Apocryphon, and so forth, they figured he would have been able to judge those scrolls as authentic right away. But he didn't. I wouldn't touch that, as we say, with a 10-foot pole, because he knew the story of Shapira. Okay, one more story. Right. Listen to this. Now, many people know the story of the Metropolitan Samuel. It says he consulted Hannah Stephen, a Syrian Christian employed by the Transjordan Department of Antiquities, but he pronounced the scrolls late. So Father Samuel goes to this guy, Hannah Stephen, and says, hey, what do you think? Those are late. Now get why he says that. Now he continues, Samuel continues to stress and tell stories of Origen and Timothy. Stephen cautions Samuel, citing the Shapira affair. Okay. So he said, he's telling him, no, look, you remember the story that we have? We mentioned them earlier in the show. One of these early sources about Dead Sea Scrolls was in Origen. He describes how these scrolls were found in caves and so forth. And but he said, no, don't remember the Shapira affair. So I went and I found this on eBay. This is the Treasure of Qumran. And in the Treasure of Qumran, it gives the story that he just described, where he goes to him. And listen to this. Certainly, if you would venture such opinions and be proved wrong. In other words, when Samuel goes to him and says, come on, at least consider if these are real or not. This is what he says. I don't want anything to do with it. I've heard of one such scholar so maligned that he took his own life in despair. He's talking about Shapira. See, and that was the story. So here we've got 80 years after the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I say 80 because we think it's Shapira is discovered, the Shapira fragments are discovered in 1865. And then 1946, 47, about 81, 82 years later, Dead Sea Scrolls are discovered. So, but they still have in their memory the Shapira affair.
Yeah, and it initially taints this discovery in Qumran. So listen, he has the 16 leather strips. I don't think does the first chapter talk about how he sends a copy of or a transcription to Schlotman? We're not there yet, is that right?
I think you're right. I think we are not quite there. I think what we get to is one final point.
Moab.
Yeah, we're gonna go to Moab next. But what's so interesting about the way that the story that Shapira gives of the provenance of his documents, he says, because he knows the question is going to come up. What else do we know about are there more? Or is there, should we go look in caves like Ross and Jono and Patty and Dave and maybe there's some more out there. Well, what he does is he says, look, the guy that was bringing them to me, I worked that deal through Sheikh Erakat. But Erakat died suddenly, severing my connection to him. Remember,
So no more
Erakat's
Saleem.
no more Saleem. This is a different Saleem,
So,
remember.
so
Keep
that
your
different
Saleem
Saleem,
straight.
he's now out of the picture. Okay.
Yeah. And so, and also the guy is a crooked guy. He can't go into Jerusalem because it was it was a bad, the Turks would put you down. So he can't go because he's a wanted man. And Shapira doesn't know how to get in touch with him because
Which is
everything
why
is
they're meeting on
worked
the road
through the
through the
intermediary.
sheep.
Yep.
So he dies. That's the end of that Saleem, the courier, and that's where we find ourselves. Okay, so that's the end of your chapter, the first
Well,
chapter, and the next chapter is all about Moab, Ross.
yep. One thing I'll say just to bring us to the absolute close, the last couple of pages, what Shapira ends up with in his possession, Jono, are 16 fragments representing roughly 42 columns of text. He says that he thinks he's got 2 copies of the same manuscript, virtually identical, and a smidgen, a little piece of a third is what he thinks, okay? But he says that these fragments, 16 in all, he begins to work on transcribing them. Now, what I did, the thing that I think sets the Moses Scroll apart, and I'm thankful for the Tyler's helping me get this translated because this breaks it wide open. You see, it's the German side of the message. Everybody knows what happens when the scroll goes to England, but few books really cover what happens in Germany. And because of this book, it gives the dimensions of the fragments. It tells me we have, and I even have a document, a diagram in the book, in the Moses Scroll, that shows what Goethe describes. I have 5 single fragments, 2 sets of 2, on and on and on. Last point. He describes how this manuscript looked in terms of the black stuff on the back and the pieces of linen stuck in the tar. He describes a few more details, and then the story drops like this. This is the way I'll wrap this up, and then I'll open it up. It says this: for several weeks in a workspace above the best tourist shop in Jerusalem's old city, the 16 leather strips with their 42 columns of text began to yield their long-held secrets. The message on the Moabite manuscript amazed Shapira. He soon came to believe that he might have before him the most significant archaeological discovery of all time. Yes, Shapira thought, this Moabite scroll would undoubtedly earn him a place of distinction, forever saving his name from the stain of a previous unfortunate episode associated with discoveries from the sands of Moab. Moab, Jono, had nearly ruined Shapira then. Perhaps Moab would save him now.
So in the same way that the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls were tainted because of the similarities of the previous discovery, the Shapira scroll, that scroll that Shapira acquired was also tainted with the previous discovery of the Moabitica. And we're going to be talking about that. That is chapter 2. We're going to be launching into that next week. And so there's your homework, dear viewers. If you have the book, if you don't have it already, once again, you can get it on Amazon, hardcover, paperback, and Kindle. You can get it right now. That is your homework for next week. And we are going to head over now to the Yachad, which is live in Discord. How can people be a part of that, Ross?
I'll tell you what, it's not very hard, Jonah. All they have to do, they can pick it however they want to do it. They can either join the YouTube channel. There are different levels that they can join, whatever they can afford to do. They can also join on Discord. We have the different tiers there. And then Patreon, patreon.com/Ross K. Nichols. They can go there and they can join any level as little as $10 a day, and they can be part of this fun audience that we have right now. Easy to do.
There it is. Now,
it helps us. It helps us to do all that we do. It helps us to pay our worthy staff of one.
Speaking of joining things, by the way, is there any room left in the UI conference? Can people still register for that? I know it's free to register.
Can. They certainly can. It's on the United Israel website, uiwu.org or uiwu.com. At the top, you'll see a navigation. It says conference. You click there.
Mhm.
You have to register, Jono, because we have John Langberg is going to actually cook some of the meals, so he needs to
Good
know.
stuff.
Yeah, so he
He
needs
did
to
a bit
know
of that
what
when I
to-
was there a couple of years ago. So I'm looking forward.
I know.
I'm going to be there this coming conference. I'm looking forward to it. This is the 81st UI conference, and we're going to be discussing some great stuff, some very interesting things. And so I'm looking forward to seeing people, seeing some viewers there, and Tanakh tourists, and catching up with a lot of people. That's going to be April, this coming April. So make sure that you register. Let us know that you're coming. That is there. What is happening in the Shabbat class?
All right. On Saturday, we are in the book of Exodus now. We're going through our Pentateuch New Look series. That has been incredibly fun. We've got a whole new group of people who are hearing these lessons. And then what we do is, so we're in the second Torah portion of the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. This week, we're going to be talking about the name of God. Interesting that our document, our manuscript here has a different take on this, but maybe it's not so different. Maybe the book of Exodus is letting us know that it knows something about the name not being known in antiquity, Jono. So we're going to talk about that, and that's part of the class. And then after the class on Saturday, 10:30 a.m. Central Time on youtube.com/Ross K. Nichols TV. You can join there, and then afterwards, you'll automatically be directed to a discussion where I'm discussing live with those of our friends who are with us in Discord, and so we look forward to having people there.
And that is it from us. So don't forget to like this video, leave a comment or a question, and perhaps we might address it next week. But we'll be back this time next week as we continue on this riveting saga of Moses Shapira and the Moses Scroll. And until then, have a good one.
Hey, thanks, Jono.